Wonderful panel discussion today, the more than human in art and humanities. So we have been starting, you probably noticed that we've been cycling through the 15 research posters that we got as a result of our call for postgraduate research posters, early career and postgraduate. And they're fantastic images. I have to say, we were just so surprised and so delighted, actually, that the whole range of the 15 posters covered far more than we expected in terms of the breadth of the range of what this topic might offer in terms of possibilities for consideration and discussion and areas for thinking about. So they will be placed on our Place International website. So they're hosted there. They're shared with a link to our other research network, LAND². So both of our two research networks, Place International and LAND² members, are here invisibly with us online. So I think we have how many people do we have just now? Over 50, and we are looking maybe at some point to be up to 80 today for our online audience. That's across several countries, so we're really pleased to have our invisible colleagues here with us as well to join us. So let me make a few introductions now. First of all, we have with us Dr. Katie Potapoff, who is helping us behind the scenes here, very behind the scenes. In all sorts of ways. She's helping us manage our online audience and the chat and helping us with the technical wizardry of things that are brought to us here by the magic of technical things. We have with us our two guest speakers. Our third, Dr. Undine Sellbach, unfortunately, due to personal circumstances, is not able to be with us today. She sent us all of her best wishes, and we all sent her our very best wishes as well. But it was unavoidable. We'll have her another time for another visit. She's a philosopher who specializes in the more than human as well. But we do have with us Derrick Guild, and we have Kevin Frediani. Now, I've been utterly rude and cheeky and asked both of them to introduce themselves. Now, there's method in this madness. The reason why I've asked them to introduce themselves is because I couldn't possibly do as good a job as they can talking about themselves and their research interests and how some of this might kind of branch into some of the areas for today's discussion. But following their very brief but very enlightening self-introduction, we're going to have a few questions that I'll start prompting, at which point the conversation will ensue. And I'm sure you folks will have a few questions, as will our online audience, who are here and very invested in this kind of conversation as well. So it's going to be a delightful afternoon here. We're going to draw it to a conclusion at 4:45. That's our latest, because we have to pack up and pull out of here before 5 o'clock. But okay, so first of all, I'm going to hand over to Kevin and have him introduce himself. Katie's going to do her thing and help us get up to, there we go, get up to things.
I'd like to see that too, sort of.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to do the same.
Well,
you go there.
thank you very much, Mary, for that introduction, and Katie for the back of house. Things just keeping us on the ground. Hopefully I'm going to provide a little bit more than an introduction to myself, because a lot of my last 35 years work has been really immersed within the sense of trying to understand how spaces become places through imbued emotion, and then from that work into understanding it's not emotion as we know it, but it's more about the agency between the human and the more than human. This is for our missing third speaker that would have been here talking about Uxmill's work. In terms of my living world, it should be my working world, if you ask my wife. And it's because it's continuous and seamless in that invention. But I'm really going to focus on the Botanic Garden as a living laboratory, which is where I am at the moment in my sort of thinking and working. Through that, look at the city as an ecosystem, as a natural progression, and then the work that's I'm part of as a director in the bioregion, looking at the different levels here. And then there is some emergent work I might get to talk about later on about tree ecology, because I'm helping write a book on tree ecology at the moment. Oops, it's not clicking through, sorry. We've frozen. Okay, you have to look at me. In terms of understanding that material agency, here's a picture of the Botanic Garden in 1970, before it began, with one lonely sycamore tree and a former field that was growing with potatoes. And if we flick through and look at it today, it's very much changed in that landscape. As 50 years growth, 100 feet or more of height and girth. The material culture of plants that's been introduced by 4 different curators is now forming a living ecosystem. It's more than the organisms or the populations of organisms, because we're one of the world's only botanic gardens laid out through ecological principles, and we look at the communities of plants in their place, and more than communities, as we will come on to see. But my own role in botanic gardens, heritage gardens, and what we would have called living and cultural heritage when I was at the Natural Trust for Scotland has been quite diverse. It's been quite challenging. I was the first curator of plants and gardens at London Zoo and Whipsnade. I've been a curator, the only curator from outside of the Netherlands to run Amsterdam Botanic Gardens, which is one of the oldest botanic gardens in the world. In fact, a training place for many of the great botanists of old, as we used to call them. But most latterly at Inverview, a place on the west coast in the north where you really are living on the edge. It helps you really think differently about what it is for a space to become a place and for our interactions with others. But along the way, I've done things that are very different, like this, the world's first commercial vertical farm. So I'm not adverse to technology and technological enhancement of the worlds that we help create and give away in terms of that. Next slide, please. But a lot of my work I start, and I've become very comfortable with not finishing it. There's different times where I find in a conversation an opportunity arises, or I find someone literally better placed to do that work than me. And at that point, I rest my hat and walk away. I'm very comfortable to do that. And there's a podcast out there that tells you all about that. Thank you. The most recent work in the Botanic Garden is the fruition of thinking around how these spaces have evolved from places of privilege and power behind a curtilage and a paled wall, where if you or I walked into it and we weren't friends with the landowner, we would literally be hung, drawn and quartered. As I found when I was looking after Windsor Great Park and the Norman Tower, one of the oldest gardens that we know of, continuously gardened since 1066 and all that. As we move through what we reflect back on in terms of the way that we write our histories as an enlightened period with the Renaissance at the beginning, before the rise of the sciences, Hortus Medicus was a garden taken out with the curtilage of protection within the abbeys and the friaries, where medicinal gardens were maintaining collections of plants that really Pliny wrote about back in the Roman times. And we were already exploiting plants for the benefits they afforded. The training of before doctors for apothecaries in the preparation of these plants was important, because obviously many of our medical practices were happening out with, and later on with, barber surgeons, not with medical practices we know them today. Hortus Botanicus, the botanic gardens that we know today are really quite exploitive places. We had a brief conversation about Kew. Kew was set up under order of the British Empire to exploit the world's resources for the benefit of the imperial power. If you reflect on that and the impact it's had, I'll name a few crops: tobacco, sugar, and you think about the relationships between them and cotton and our ports, Glasgow, Liverpool, Bristol, from the southwest, and the impact that's had in the Caribbean, St. Vincent, the world's first Western garden, exploiting slaves through material culture of plants for the benefit of the United Kingdom. How do we emerge from that and recognize more than human qualities? A place to share and apply knowledge. Well, this term, Hortus Apatus, the garden of knowledge, is what I've been trying to both perceive and realize through giving the garden away and working in a collegiate way. The subjects of human ecology, global change and regeneration are at the key of this work. Life on Earth, nature-based solutions, which I'm now questioning in more than human thinking, in terms of that exploitive pound note that we put against the work we put nature to for our own gain. Going beyond that to regenerative practices, which are not about ecosystem services, but they're about ecosystem functions beyond the here and now for us. It's all life on Earth. It's about art, ecology, and diversity. A just transition. And that brings us to the living lab, this concept of using nature-based solutions to conserve biodiversity within the places that we help, imbue emotional engagement with public and professionals as we try to change their minds and their methods of work through ecological leadership, outdoor learning, sustainable food systems, nature-based solutions, and sustainable land use. The result should be a sustainable land use, not only in the Botanic Garden, but by direct relationship over the garden wall in the university grounds that we also look after as we prototype in the Botanic Gardens and then we scale. We work at the city level through urban relief as one of 6 pilot projects across Europe that is looking to unlock the power of citizen observation, filling a data ecosystem that currently is not joined up or public to empower people to help design their own future cities. A transition, a just transition from grey to green and blue, because this habitat is not the one that we're meant to walk in. It's not the one we're meant to live in. The concrete and steel actually challenges us, and we've got to learn how to soften that hard architecture. And then hopefully that goes on beyond Dundee. One of the things that has emerged through this work is that although I'm here today to share that knowledge, I'm not the storyteller or the voice of the garden. It's actually better to find others to engender that voice, and the voice of the artist has been the most pure in that relationship. I often think of art as an emotional connection through the artist and a time machine to the person receiving that relationship. And in many ways, gardens do that, but with a 4th dimension. They change every moment of every day in the material agency of those more than human aspects. Thank you. That we see as nature in that binary Cartesian dualism that we're trying to challenge. Here's some of that work that comes through from the Art and Nature Collective. Indeed, the cyclogenesis shows how it's helping us respond to material agency from things like storm that blow through and knock over 48 trees that we turn into land art in the garden rather than clearing it away and saying it never happened. We're learning to live with it, become resilient as a garden, but wear our scars together. I used to say that spaces become places imbued with emotion through the actions and reactions of people and the environment. I realize now it's not the emotions. That's only one of the senses. Yeah. It's actually more about the agency, the action and reaction that happens. Thank you. And this leads me to the work at the bioregion. And bioregions are these natural units which we all innately know and share as a community within a landscape, our watersheds where the rain falls and the land feeds us, clothes us, puts shelter over our heads before we look to globalized world. If you think about the words kin, which the etymology of that is the blood that we share at birthing. It's very close. The kith, the land that we share with our kin and with our community. And key, as Robin Wall-Kimmerer suggests, the new pronoun we need for that nature that we would have called it, but actually we share 60% or more of the DNA with. Very much relationship. Thank you. So I've been trying to understand how we can change this relationship with nature and see not a social system and an ecosystem divided, but within the whole, because we are nature. And our systems have to, if they are truly to be sustainable, become co-joined and interrelated. And that means multiple knowledge systems need to come to bear, including two-eyed seeing that we learn from the bioregioning. It also includes the technology that we are uncovering and learning about. So one of our projects is how can we become ecological through technology? Thank you. So More Than Human to me is about reading lots of books, challenging myself and challenging others. And some of these I share because if you don't know them, I suggest it's worth reading them and learning to become human, which, as Tim Ingalls tells us, is a life journey worth the first step. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Katie, can you put yours up?
Had them in some kind of order, but
Yep, I did the order that I gave you.
yeah. I don't recognize that
Oh,
image.
no, not the first one, just
Oh.
next one. Yeah, there we go. Is that
Okay,
correct?
no, that's not, well, that wasn't, anyway, yeah, maybe start here. Yeah, so I'm Derrick, yeah. My work, baseline comes from the history of still life. That's kind of where it starts. An interest in animals and botanical art throughout history, and narratives that are kind of inherent in things from the past, and researching those and building new narratives. This is a painting by Jean-Baptiste Udry from 1749 of Clara, the rhinoceros. Clara was an Indian rhino who had been kept as a, what do you call it, as a calf? As a calf in Siam, which was now Thailand, as a pet. Ultimately, Clara became the first real rhino to tour and be exhibited in Europe. 15 years, I think, Clara traveled. But this painting by Udry is life size, so it's 15 feet long. So we can go on to the next slide. What I often, no, that's wrong. I need to find some, there's other rhino images. Keep going, sorry. Yeah, well, so I first of all came up with this idea. I've been thinking about animal sentience for a long time, and people like Udry often, if you looked at the painting that by Udry at the start, it's the animal's kind of placed like an important individual in the landscape, and it's very flaccid. And for years, I was trying to find a way to anthropomorphize the animals, and came up with quite a simple way of getting that across, where I'm particularly interested in the eyes that Van Dyck paints. So I did my version of Clara, which is about 7 or 8 feet long, on an eye, and I think I got this charge, this kind of really interesting charge between the human, the viewer, and the animal. Can we go on to another slide? There should be a, no, we need to keep going. They're all out of order. Keep going. Oh no, missing. Yeah, the one with the shark fin. Yeah, so this is an exhibition I've just been in Istanbul. It was called Suppose You Are Not. This gives you an idea of the scale of the image, and a different version of the painting showed there. So John Isaacs, this is a really interesting pairing I was in with Michael Dew, John Isaacs and Nancy Foots, a grouping there. It's in this large show. So nature for me is that I'm really interested in looking at nature through, I'm a bit confused now because they're all in totally different order. I'm sorry. It's through art. So if can we go to that image of the plants? Yeah. Yes. So in 2007, my family and I went to live on the island of Ascension in the South Atlantic. we lived at the base of a mountain called Green Mountain. And Green Mountain basically came about because Darwin visited Ascension. I don't know if you know where Ascension Island is, but it's 6 degrees south of the equator, bang in the middle of the Atlantic. Its indigenous plants were such that until Darwin arrived, or soon after, no bird seed or plants had arrived there from any other part of the world. So it was only like 4 they were just little shrubs and succulents, tiny little things. But while Darwin was there, he was coming back from the Beagle on his way up. He noticed there was a cloud forest. There was a garrison of Marines there that had been there because Napoleon was being held on St. Helena, which is 600 miles away. So there was a kind of settlement as such. But Darwin noticed there was clouds on top of this island, and this kind of stuck in his head. He went back to London and he spoke to George Hooker at Kew, and they came up with this idea called the Green Experiment, where they basically planted what's now a self-sustaining cloud rainforest on the top of Green Mountain. Now, the plants that are there, and I lived amongst this, they were from India, Australia, they were from Scotland, they were from England, they were from all over Europe, and they all cohabit. It's interesting because they kind of they graduate up the mountain until you get to a bamboo forest. And at the time I was there, it started to become a big model for terraforming Mars because it's such a dry climate. And then to build a sustainable rainforest, self-sustaining rainforest, is a very difficult thing to do, because it was actually creating its own cloud. Anyway, having these narratives, as I say, it's a big thing for me. So I thought about Mars in the future and how these people might think that plants, what they'd be like. So I started making these trompe-l'oeil life-size botanical paintings. So they're up to about 7, 8 feet high, of impossibly hybridized plants. All from Green Mountain. So you've got Bengal clockvine, you've got golden solanaceae, I don't know if you pronounce that. You've got, I forgot the name of that one there. I've got a really bad memory. But the thing is that the whole thing's painted, so it's an illusionistic painting against the dark background, the paper and everything. It was about the idea of, I'm reading this idea of making an illusionistic painting of something that doesn't exist. So it's not surreal to me, it's something else. You can move on to the next one. There's another, that was a bigger one, incorporating banana, ginger, all sorts of different plants. There should be a third one somewhere. Yep. What's interesting now, though, Stetson Stroud, who's the gardener, the main gardener on the island, for years they thought it was terrible that these are invasive, in a sense, compared to its indigenous plants. They really thought about kind of clearing this out and trying to get it back to it. But Stetson found some of they weren't all dead, they hadn't been wiped out. And it is now, rather than it being a model for terraforming Mars, it's now seen as an interesting way that a positive effect on the landscape has been made by human interaction, rather than it being a negative effect. So its role has changed, I think, in people's thinking. So I'm a bit confused about the order. Yeah, up here, go up to the, if you go up, yeah, just go up to that. So that's a little still life painting that really talks about, white bread, locusts, plagues, mixing these things up. There should be another small one. Yeah, it was interesting. That's quite hard to see. It's very dark, but it's a tiny painting. But it's a turtle hatchling with a piece of chocolate on top of it, and it's about to me, it's a symbol of the pressures that our desires. I think chocolate's one of those things that creates a particular response in our brain. And I think that kind of response puts a lot of weight on nature. These kind of addictions and stuff we get. maybe go to that one here. I'm just back from The Hague. Yeah, no, this one, where I'm doing several visits to the 2-year restoration of Paulus Potter's young bull. And I'm making a whole body of work about that, which I'll really get onto when I'm working for a show at the moment. Once I get that done, I'll get onto this. I'm just really interested in how we represent animals. Another thing I just mean with botanical painting is that scientific, and everything you were saying, I totally related to about the order. You know, it's so valuable, all this stuff. I mean, some of the great plant explorers were actually from West Coast of Scotland, because they were very skilled in so many different animal husbandry, looking after themselves. They were good at speaking a few languages, so a lot of them were out there bringing it back. But it's a very structured system, the botanical painting. I find when I lived on Ascension Island and was in amongst a rainforest, the fecundity and the unruliness of that really kind of bear no correlation to botanical painting as such, which is a kind of scientific approach. And I just thought, well, I need something that just kind of works with my imagination. And it's the same thing when I'm looking at these animals, and there's so much narrative behind them. I'm speaking to the conservators. But go to that one there above it, yeah. A really nice that when he blocked in the young bull, it didn't have a gender at first. It's quite right. And that was something I was thinking about. I was thinking about flea martins, that kind of gender aspect of the animal being both male and female. It's a thing that I'm interested in some of my portraiture work. Can we just flick through, because I can't remember what I've got here. Oh, we got that bike here. It's an early painting. It's kind of life-size bike covered in birds. It's done in about 2003, 2004. And in a painting like that, I was thinking about Geoffrey Chaucer's Parliament of Fowls and Franz Schneider's Concert of Birds. But also at the time, there was this big scare about bird flu in China. They were really stirring it up. This is a long time before we were 5 years ago. But also the structure of the bike being pyramidic. You know, really, when you sit on a bike, you're at the point of a pyramid. I loved that whole kind of balance thing. So a lot of my work is there's a lot of connections and not necessarily rational connections. And I don't think they're surreal either, because it's interesting. One thing I've learned over the years is that when you're making a painting or an artwork, so I do film and photography and performance and stuff as well, but this is a kind of baseline. For me, there's a certain part where the artwork begins to work. And I don't really know what that is. I've thought about it a lot. And I think what it is a connection to a subconscious. It's a subconscious question gets answered. And the subconscious is a place of the dream. You know, it's non-verbal. And that's where you get this kind of dream. I think Chaucer was the first person to use the dream vision as a way of writing. I don't dream these things, but they are visions. They come to me and I see them. So I find that quite interesting. So a piece of work, a non-surreal representational piece of work, access to your own subconscious is quite interesting, I think. Oh, look at that one there. Yeah. You can't really see these. They're very dark. So that's an early painting from 20, I don't know, a long time ago. Camouflage. Just taking the pomegranate grenade, and just playing with that and kind of debunking the camouflage. This almost ended up a poster for a first woman at the concert. But Damien Hirst beat me to it. So, but I think I'll leave it at that. Sorry, I'm a bit thrown by the order being so different. I should have maybe make it a bit more clear. But I think you get an idea of what I'm about there. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Derrick and Kevin. Thank you very much. Sorry for mixing up.
That's fine. I just, it's a good test.
Gotta speak off the cuff. Well, we're at the point where I'm going to start a prompt with a few questions, but then I'm sure lots of you have questions, and I'm certain that lots of our audience online have questions as well. I guess my first question was prompted by an early audience online question, asking me about the distinction of why because it was my decision to do this, call this the more than human as opposed to the other than human. Now, I had my own reasons, but I would really be interested in hearing how both of you responded. Did it throw you that it was more than human? Or did you welcome that as a prompt? Or how did that come about for you? Kevin?
Well, it made me go back and actually do my homework on what the more than human geographies, especially because they more relate to the sort of field I'm in, had meant. And I was surprised to see a lot of my threads were aligned to the ideas that are underneath it. If you think going back to humanist thinking, and I mentioned the Cartesian dualism, our mind and body being separate, and this question I've been playing with about how do we help people be better interrelated with their kith and kin that they share as key in the landscapes around them, which I was very warm to through my work with bioregioning and my own question in life, being a Cornishman with an Italian name, of what does it mean to be indigenous to place? Because I pointed out this is not my habitat, being in the urban world, and yet that's where I find myself. And although I grew up on rural Dartmoor, I've had to learn to become au fait in the relationships, the politics of human world. But what about the politics and the relationships with that more than human world? So in the selective reading, going back through, I realized that many of the people who have informed modern human thinking, and it's not a philosophy, thinking, have been people I've read over the years, Sarah Watmore. If you think back to her work, I mean, that threw me when I first read it, and it still throws me today. So I think in terms of that understanding of the action and reaction with more than human is something I get in terms of the relationship and the politics I get. And I've just written a paper about the role of curation, which its etymology it comes from to care for. It's to care. And if you think about that, if we truly care for those things that we are sentient of, but also more than sentient, we feel and we embody in the world as we move through it, then we need to be able to both share that with others. And I think in that respect, you've given me the opportunity of at least exploring and making sense of my work in the context of a parallel universe, which is enriching for me on a personal level. So thank you.
Good. Thanks. Derrick, how about you?
Well, I think I've been working this way for a long, long time. But I mean, I've always thought that humans are a bit too disconnected. And one of my ways of connecting is to sort of understand through art, strangely enough. But I was brought up in the countryside by the River Tay, really. That's where I spent most of my time. So I was kind of immersed in understanding animals, but often hunting and fishing and stuff. So it was pretty firsthand. But I've always felt quite connected to the natural world. But I think there is a big disconnect. I think the more than human, I don't know if that just reiterates it and maybe makes it. I mean, zoos are interesting to me. I think the National Portrait Gallery is a zoo for me. It's the same way as going to a zoo, but I think maybe more as kind of head spaces. But I think it's a good term. I think it shows the gap. And the gap's the problem, I think. But in my work, I sort of dip in and out of it, how I have done for 30, 40 years. Kind of thinking of inclusiveness with animals and connections and thinking. But I'm not, I mean, I'm more interested in someone like Philip K. Dick and how he, the person that wrote Do Androids Dream of Electric Sleep, that became Blade Runner, that quite his future view, where animals are the most important thing you could possibly buy. So when it comes to theory and all that, I just kind of switch off a little bit.
Mhm.
I can confess that one of my hesitations for using something like the other than human was because I think one of the things that people do and have done for a very long time is to separate themselves out from the rest of the world, and other than seems to be one way to kind of position that degree of separation. So I chose more than human, which meant that it wouldn't exclude humans. It would invite a kind of engagement that's co-participatory, but also thinking more broadly, reaching more. The use of the word more implies to me a kind of more energetic reach. And that's what I was aiming for. Obviously in the context of many people talking about more than human these days. But I understand, Derrick, your impulse as well, because I've known your paintings for decades.
You have, yeah.
Many decades.
Yeah.
And see, again, that kind of stretch to reach something that functions in a way through the kind of power of art to evoke or to mean in ways that appeal to dream state or to emotion or to that sense of something that doesn't necessarily have a kind of verbalized attachment to it. And that makes a lot of sense to me as well, that kind of way of working with those images that pull a kind of degree of affinity from a kind of an emotional state, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I've got another question here, if it's okay for me to, are we okay, Katie, to move on with the question. So another question I had is that arts and humanities research in the more than human obviously has a kind of acknowledgement to the sciences, to geography, to cartography, and a whole host of other disciplines. But there are some things that are particular to art and humanities as research methods, disciplinary areas that reach into things. I've just touched on with your work, Derrick. Does this mean that sometimes in the ways that you work, both of you, this is a question for both of you, that some of your interests and some of the ways that you research, you rely upon the more than human as a kind of a code? Could it be? Kevin, what do you think?
I have to think about that one. Yeah, I mean, in terms of, can I just ask, in terms of clarifying the
Yes,
code,
sure.
do you mean as in codifying the work that I'm engaged in? Or
I mean that your work can be used or focused in a certain way that implies not only what it is, but something more than what it is.
Yeah.
As a pointer to something else. Yeah.
And I think I alluded to that with the Botanic Garden as an ecological Botanic Garden, where often if you think about Botanic Gardens, the way they're set out is the A to Z. It's a collection based on the individual organism. And I purposely came to Dundee because as an ecological Botanic Garden, it has populations, not individual plants, that are then planted in communities. But there is something else happening. And that something else we're trying to both measure through things like BirdNet Pi and our systematic surveys, through the work with Gardeners Canvas, with artists that are capturing different aspects of it. And it is alive as an ecosystem. And the organisms within it are shaping it. So the fact that after 50 years we had sparrowhawks breeding there, red squirrels, this is in an urban centre that we've got pine martins in Dundee, in a botanic garden that was created only 50 years ago. We've got function in an ecosystem.
Well, they provide from their own.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's nuts. But it also shows you how novel ecologies, going back to the Ascension Islands, are part of this urban futures, if we will it. rather than to see things as other, which is why I hinted on that word of key. And I think the writings, you know, I read a lot because I didn't necessarily come from that area. I'm a natural scientist. I'm a horticulturalist by background, but I've had to train and retrain and reread and question and engage as I've tried to understand what it means to be human and become human as part of a complex web of meshwork. And also to do that in a world that's rapidly changing and becoming a counterpoint to the way I think we can be, which is in commune, in community, together, sharing for a better outlook. And so, yeah, I think in terms of that as a metaphor for life, you bet you. Yeah. More than human works well for me.
Great, great. Derrick, how about you?
Yeah, well, definitely codes in my work, but it's more to do, I suppose it's value systems, categories, you know, still life, botanical painting, portraiture, animals, flowers. Within the contemporary postmodern world that I grew up in, these weren't really things that people were doing, and these are the things I was attracted to. And it was actually quite a punk standpoint, you know, in a sense, to be doing this stuff. It's not why I was doing it, because what I was interested in, but there's definitely well, like I said about botanical painting, it's very codified, it's very scientific, it's very rigid. You know, you turn the flint. Plants aren't like that. I mean, I don't know, the way they grow. I mean, these paintings took me, I think, as long as the thing would take to grow, because I didn't actually plan them out. I went to a flower or a plant and I started painting it until I got it right. And I had about 6 or 7 of them on the go at once, maybe, you know, and that was really interesting to me. So I was engaging in a way, but I wasn't buying the system, if you know what I mean. So the codes are all there, but the codes might not be necessarily that positive. They're quite a high critique level going on in my work that you might not notice. But then I think we've got to get our message across the best way we can. We use the tools that we have. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, brilliant. Does somebody here have a burning question they'd like to ask? Yes, Susie. Yeah.
Struck by an earlier conversation, Kevin, that we had when you were explaining to me in the gardens that, of course, the gardens are like a metaphor in and of themselves for this entire entanglement of us as what we tend to refer to as nature, as being, we're not separate, we are nature. But in thinking about more than human, thank you, in thinking about those 3 words, more than human, when you were explaining that the gardens themselves rely on volunteers and obviously the more than human intelligences of flowers popping up and weeds, and as humans we have this, and Tim Morton speaks about this a lot, about this obsession about how things look and how they have to look, and the control that we have as humans in certain environments. You made reference to that as actually being that kind of tension around, obviously you're working in a very aestheticized, curated environment, but also as the curator, you're desperate to allow the more than human influences to play out. And I just wondered how that, how you navigate that in a sort of infrastructure of a great big university machine, how you manage to allow, because really you're still in control, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, to care for in that curation, you are in control, but also at the right at the beginning, I made a conscious decision to try to let go and to explore what that looks like. And again, for anybody who knows the history of the Botanic Gardens, 1971 is when it was founded. At the same time, there's a garden by Geoffrey Dutton up in the Angus Glens being founded. And Geoffrey Dutton and Eddie Kemp, the curator at the Botanic Gardens, shared plant knowledge, shared ideas and juxtapositions. And there were 2 visions of ecology in a garden. And Desiree Corral, one of the recent PhD graduates here, has been exploring that together with me and with other artists as we try to unpick what's going on. The difference in the vision there, if you like, was Eddie came from a traditional curator's position where they are in ultimate control. they look to bring in the material culture of plants, and it is how can you say, it's a relationship that's not reciprocal. It's not reciprocated. It's very much about that plant there in that way to represent this habitat, to be presented in that way, and this is the story that goes with it. But Geoffrey Dunton's was to create something based around an experiential relationship with an old forest in a glade and a house that he built, where he planted plants that were also grown in the Botanic Gardens and then let them go. And ultimately his wish was, when he died, that his family let that garden go, recede. And it's a garden that's becoming ecological in a very different way than the way the Dundee Botanic Garden was. So when I arrived, the ecological Botanic Garden that was being sprayed by pesticides was being mowed by 54 horsepower tractors, where the inputs of carbon were more than was being stored by the trees growing. I switched off. So I had to challenge my staff and myself to think differently about what that looks like. So now we don't use those inputs. We've allowed a structure of habitats that lets that garden be both natural habitats that you would have found, natural in brackets, in Tayside, and allowing hay to be strewn from across Angus, long established meadows, in areas that used to be mown 27 times a year, now mown once and raked off. So the sort of relationship is one that is very different, but as we try to negotiate it. So this curator is embodying curation, which is both about the gardens and the plants and those organisms that are more than human and how they respond, because we measure that. So we've got beehives which are naturalizing and rewilding. We don't take the honey off them. You know, it's counterintuitive, and it challenges my staff who thought I was bonkers. Most of the early ones are gone, and those new ones who come in who just love it because it's different than we've been told these landscapes should be. And actually, I think they're closer to the novel ecosystems we need to establish. And the ultimate thing is, I believe, a bit like when I worked in zoos, these landscapes should not exist because they should be everywhere. Urban novel ecosystems like Botanic Gardens could be our city parks, our streets, our gardens. This could be an ecosystem which is, if not neutral, working its way towards it. If we just have the power to visualize it, the rest can happen. It's possible. Got to will it. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Thank you both. My name is Domenica, first year PhD student on the subject of multi-species epistemologies. I was really curious about your kind of just ideas and thoughts about, you know, this relationship with the organic and the inorganic. Specifically, how do you both integrate the artificial and the synthetic in the context of more than human, what we're speaking here? I think specifically you were mentioning, Kevin, about your ideas on technology, and just wanted to think, about that. Thank you.
Yeah, shall I start first then? In terms of that, in terms of, I mean, at a molecular level, we are stardust, and we've shared that across the universe, and we will share it once again. So on the physical side, let's have a look at the timelines we're talking about. In the here and now, the organic and inorganic is something that we are experiencing all the time. And as I said, you know, this challenges me, and I feel much more comfortable in the environment of the garden. Just that's why I choose to work there, I guess, in that respect. But in terms of the technology, I'm trying to find a way of challenging myself, because, you know, before I engaged with gaming with Abate researchers, the last game I played was Space Invaders. So my understanding of that world was way out of kilter with where they are. So and what we ended up doing was co-curating. So we went on game curation, curated by a curator in Devon, philosophy readings instructed by my colleague at Aberdeen, and I did nature walks. And we've reciprocated that relationship as we've learned to become ecological in very different ways. And it resulted in Rhizoma, this exhibit at the end of last year, which had a group of artists, collective, a game developer, a musician, a visual artist, a computer mechanist, I guess they'd call it, who sort of works behind the scenes on making these things look rendered or not. And the gallery, which they blacked out and created this experience based on mycorrhizal fungi ramified through the soil, connecting us through technology with the world. And in terms of that, I don't know if it's answering your question, but it gives you an example of how I'm exploring it. We haven't got there yet because we're trying to put together a research project which allows us to not only do that learning journey, because we've been doing it for about 18 months, but facilitate that learning journey with others to understand if we take people out of the garden and into a natural environment and do the same thing, would it work the same as if we took them in the Keeler Centre and did it there? Does place matter in that context of understanding the organic and inorganic, the human restricted in this mind and body dualism, and then separating that where we realize we are nature in all its forms, including the materiality in the concrete that we used to be a star with once upon a time, you know, and that's an ongoing journey. So hopefully it will come out in a game or something, I guess. And then we can also bring another generation who are, you know, we grew up in a rural landscape and came to a city, one of the last generations to do so. Most people now are born in cities. They will die in cities. Their understanding of the potentiality of more than human engagement is limited. And it's a shifting baseline. I knew 24 wildflowers in a meadow. My children knew 12. Their understanding of diversity is based on 12, not 27. And they don't know any different, despite my best efforts.
Mm.
That actually goes beautifully into a couple of questions that we've have from our online audience. And so Ian Biggs, our co-convener of Place International, has asked, and I think it's a great continuation, might it help us to think better ecologically if we stopped using terms like invasive species and focused instead on acknowledging that our internal ecology is heavily dependent on microorganisms that are not intrinsic to us? And this picks up on themes of other comments here about sort of the anthropomorphizing and this sort of human-centric and having us think a little bit about agency, and even thinking specifically the other than animal beings. So I guess the question or the sort of space to ponder and respond to is those sort of organisms that are maybe not intrinsic to us, taking us right out of it. Possibly.
Derrick, do you have a thought about that? Because you've been combining things.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty obvious to me. I mean, it's funny, I'm selling a house at the moment and having to clear up the garden. And there's a lot of stuff you don't want. There's a lot of stuff you do want. I'm often quite into the things that we do and don't want and why we value things. So again, it goes back to value systems. Plants, there's obviously, you know, so much value to every plant, what it's doing, but difficult question. It's not my area of speciality but I think more within historical context than within art, you know, why we valued certain things, why things have been placed on a pedestal. You talk about zoo, I talk about the portrait gallery being like a zoo, why these people that are in that portrait zoo, what kind of people are they compared to the people like me that look at these things? And it all just seems to be the same system. So an ecological system goes right the way through our society. So yeah, I don't think you have to fix it all ultimately. It's an attitude. I don't know if I can. I think it's interesting to say about the concrete being, I mean, everything's going the same way. Ultimately, entropy is going to take care of us all, you know.
Yeah, it's just a timeline, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the way I would answer that in read it is something around, we understand that there are more microbes associated with our microbiome than there are cells in our body, so we are symbiotic in that respect. And we know, but I mean, for my world in plants, we've known for many years that if you take a tree, in every cell of a tree, you will find latent decay fungi. And for years, people were concerned that where are this disease coming from? And realizing actually it's when we wound or see the outer bark revealed, and oxygen allows these organisms to grow. But the interpretation of it is not a disease. It's actually part of a cycle. If you think of a tree growing, like an oak tree, growing for 300 years, resting for 300 years, and then through this slow process of growing downwards, releasing the nutrients that are locked up so that others can grow. You know, it's life affirming. In necromass, we find life. And in fact, this cycle we restrict it in our timelines, the mortality. We project ourselves onto that, and we see death as a challenge. But I mean, I grew up with death. At 21, I lost my first child, and by 24, I'd lost 3. And in terms of this experience, it made me think very differently about what life is, how precious that is when it's here, but also what it means to be a gift to the world. And that's a very different aspect. But in terms of thinking about it in more than human terms, I mean, we know that rivers have been given human rights effectively in New Zealand. And I was reminded of this in a conversation looking at some of the urban relief work across Dundee, where they're bringing the waters that have been culverted because of the Industrial Revolution below ground to work for mankind and releasing them again to find their own level and flood in parks in Dundee. And the words of the engineer explaining it could have been poetry. Their emotional engagement with that water and the movement and the future potential that was currently locked up because of the human acts of the past made me realize the agency in that more than human relationship with the material of water, and remind me once again, we are all connected, interconnected. I mean, I'm a bag of water, just have bones to keep me up. But, you know, it's a life force we share, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, I think a kind of connection between what you've been talking about, Kevin, and what Derrick was talking about is also thinking about this question about, you know, setting. It essentially comes down to identity, but actually setting aside identity as something that is fixed or as something that is indigenous or not indigenous, you know, intrinsic or not intrinsic, and actually focusing more on qualities of recognition. So thinking about things that are the kind of interconnectedness of different aspects, different elements, different qualities of plants or animals or co-participant in certain environments, meaning that they're affected and shaped in different ways, suggests that rather than fixation on something as a static nature or a language that dwells perhaps overly in divisions and barriers, is to think about language that then possibly opens out more in terms of interconnectedness, exactly the words you've just been using, or in terms of things that, you know, have transformative powers that start as one thing and actually carry 2 or 3 or 4 different forms of variation and difference.
With that, yeah.
So question? You have a question? Oh, Dan, did you have a question? Oh, sorry, back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, you're getting your steps in.
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you both. It's nice to have both of you here. I think as a gardener, a caretaker, curator, and an artist. And it seems to me part of the question that's happening in this conversation has to do with what does it mean to be human in the midst of or as parts of this broader land community. My question's to Derrick mostly, and as an artist, I'm curious to hear what you think the role of the arts is or the artist is in this. I see your work as both kind of presenting a new way of seeing, but also your own meditative reflection on the world around you. I wonder if you could say more about what the role of the artist is in this land community.
Good question, that, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. Well, if there is a place, which I don't know if there is, because there's a commercial aspect, the art world, which is one thing, which is very powerful. Then I suppose there's individual thinking, which I'm quite interested in a sense, and that individuality sometimes must be quite codified. I suppose it's that thing I was talking about when I'm making a piece of work, you might be gaining a chance to enter to my subconscious in a way. And often when I'm looking at artworks, I think about that with the artist Mark Manders. Don't know if you know the artist Mark Manders. He's a Belgian sculptor. When he was quite young, he bought a factory. He was successful as young, and that factory, an empty factory, became him. His states of mind. It was a self-portrait. So each room that you walk in, he's an amazing artist. He has a visual language, he has a stylization, he has material use that look into him. But he's a really interesting example for me of, I suppose, that uniqueness, and I suppose that's important in a corporate world as a counterbalance to, if you look at my work, you're going to possibly look at art history, but you're also going to maybe look at plants, and you're going to look at, if you're interested, you would find more history and more relationships. So, like literature, which I'm really interested in, and filmmaking and all that stuff, that it's very stratified for what you're going to get from different areas. So, the artists that I enjoy are unique, and that's right across the board from film to. And what that offers, I don't know. I don't know if that offers anything to the planet, other than maybe making us a bit more sensitized to another's view. It's a tricky one. But is that anywhere near answering?
I think it's a perfect answer. It's a tricky one. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
There is something in terms of that relationship that Goethe reminded us
Yeah.
of in terms of his statement. If you want to know a tree, become a tree. And he was an artist and a scientist. In fact, he developed a way of seeing and a methodology that became morphology, the way that we describe plants still today in terms of that way of being. And there's something in that, like coming back to this, that phenomenological approach to like becoming, isn't it? What I hear in terms of that reflection is that as you approach your work, there is no necessary intent. You're looking at the flower, you're trying to engage with it, and then something happens in being with that plant and being with that canvas and being in that moment. I think that reminds me of Goethe in terms of his.
You do learn something,
thinking,
I think. I spent 4 years painting loaves of bread, which is a strange thing to do, but it was after my parents had died. And doing such heavy metaphorical, symbolic work, I thought I'd look for something really, okay, this is simple. I like bread, I like to look at it. So I travelled around Europe and I picked up bread from them. I spent 4 years, did a big show of them. But the ones that started were pretty good, but the ones at the end were really good.
Yeah.
And they became like planets eventually. And I could see, I understood, I was starting to see the Earth crust would form, and it became a very strange experience. But they would also switch on at a certain point. I'd be painting them, and suddenly they would switch on.
Both of your comments prompt me to ask another question. It might be our last because time is starting to run short. But in thinking about the more than human, because I have an interest in Indigenous belief systems, I'm interested by how many different Indigenous peoples across the planet have adopted something that is a kind of a, well, for lack of better terms, a kind of a spiritual affinity or a kind of totemic relationship with aspects of the more than human world. I wonder if that makes any sense to you, or if you think how you feel about something like that in your work. I mean,
yeah, I've got the very thing. I've got a 7-foot long-eared owl. I started painting 10 years ago, and it sits there in a kind of half-finished state. It's big. It sits in my studio. I knew that ours were psychopomps, are seen as in certain as ferriers of souls to the afterlife. And I know that when I finish it, it might just ferry me off. And it's an odd one. I'd like to finish it. See what happens.
Yeah.
No, I do. I've got strong superstitions and beliefs about things.
Kevin, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, I think I said earlier that I've been seeking this, what does it mean to be Indigenous, you know, in terms of my own life journey, being an Italian named Cornishman growing up on Dartmoor, where they don't even put cream on the right way round, for goodness sake. But understanding that sort of context, both cultural and also of place. And I think within my practice, in terms of both curating gardens and caring for them, but also within it, partnering and co-producing other outcomes, there is a spirituality that I feel as part of that. And that leads me to read then people like Robin Wall-Kimmerer's work. And during the bioregioning, one of the light bulb moments was when we had a Passamaquoddy elder from Maine gave us one of the lectures online during COVID when we were looking at forming this bioregioning Tayside, and he was talking about their affinity with the river as both the spirit of them. In fact, they're named after that river, but also how generations of people who had come to that area had done things to it, canalized it, put dams in to stop the fish getting, so that their headwaters, they've got 2 blocks of land, one down by the sea and one right up at the top, no longer now spawns the fish that they're affiliated with. But he talked about, in a very reflective way, about the need for two-eyed seeing, embracing the best of the Western scientific, reductive way of understanding the world, together with a more spiritual understanding of what it means to be in nature and part of nature. And for me, that just blew me away. And I've been resonating on that. Literally, my molecules are buzzing at the moment as I try to work out, well, what does that mean for my practice? Because I see myself both a scientist and an artist, but the way I work is through others, in a place becoming, as we all become nature together.
Fantastic.
I just got one last thing. Dr. Alice Roberts was on Desert Island Disc the other day. Do you know Dr. Alice Roberts? He's talking about the clavicle, which we all got. And do you know about the clavicle? It's basically, at one time it was attached to the skull. The clavicle forms completely differently to other bones in the body. And it comes from when we were fish. It's part of the jaw. And it was attaching the pectoral fins. So that was up here. It's a very interesting bone. You should look at the clavicle, because it just shows you how connected things are to the fishy people.
Yeah, the Passamaquoddy.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, wonderful. Thank you both very much. Audience online and audience here. Can we thank Derrick Guild and Kevin Frediani?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thanks, everybody online.
I'll give you this part.
One.
Brilliant.
Thanks for joining us. And this recording will probably be made available on the Place International website. And if you're interested in looking at any of the research posters that were created in response to the More Than Human call, please check out the Place International website. Thanks so much and have a great day.